What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today I'm back. And I promised you I'd be back with a particular topic, and that was the price of Paramount War singles. You see, last week we had the pre-releases for Paramount War, and I brought you a video where I told you, hey dudes, don't buy singles. Do not buy singles of Paramount War. After the pre-release, the prices are inflated and way too high, and when we see the full release of the set, they're going to drop. The prices will drop. And I had a lot of comments, some very polite, some not very polite, telling me how wrong I was, and how that's never going to happen, and the price is just going to stay high and keep going up and all of that. And would you believe it? I'm going to prove it in a minute with example after example after example, but it turns out that in a shocking twist, yeah, the prices are coming down very nicely, exactly as we expected. But before we get into that, I do want to have a little bit of a note about Romance Dawn. Because, of course, as several of you have pointed out, Romance Dawn did not follow the usual cadence. Romance Dawn kind of kept going up, and we saw little drops here and there for some of the cards. The thing is, with Romance Dawn, there was no pre-release. We saw a release and hype that nobody could have predicted. Nobody could possibly have predicted how popular it was going to be. And the lack of a pre-release combined with the fact that it was absurdly popular in a way we haven't seen any card game in, at least a decade, probably longer. That's why Romance Dawn did what it did. But the rule with pre-releases is really simple. When there's a pre-release, there is a small amount of cards that make their way onto the market. Everybody gets super excited and rushes to buy them, prices go silly, the main set releases proper, we then see prices drop as way more supply hits the market. That's what I was telling you in the previous video, and I do need to come back and kind of defend myself here and point out, you know what? That's what I told you was going to happen, and that is exactly what has happened. And I'm sure all the people that were terribly rude are going to go back and leave responses to their comments where they told me how stupid I was. I am sure that's going to happen. And one more caveat before we get rolling proper. These prices aren't going to become ridiculously cheap. Paramount War is still sold out everywhere. When I say prices are falling, I mean prices are falling. I don't mean they're getting ludicrously cheap. That was never going to happen, not until supply stabilizes. And I am very much like you with all of this. I want supply to stabilize. I want there to be enough that we're all just walking into shops and buying it straight away. That is unfortunately not where we are right now. And we're not going to be there for a little while. We will be there, as I predicted time and time again. We're just not there right now. So, the alternate art leaders. This is as close as we're getting to an exception. Because the alternate art leaders, let's start off with Edward Newgate. The most expensive card in the set, the alternate art leader of Edward Newgate. And the thing about this is that these are one-off cards. You only ever need one of them. And it's going to be on your field the whole time. It's really the center of your deck, and for that reason, people feel pretty confident spending extra money on leaders in a way that they don't in terms of other cards, characters, and the like. And the pull rates are quite low, so these are going to stay a little bit higher. If we have a look at Edward Newgate here, we can see that the current market price is $195. But it's come down from the peak of $210. This has gone up, and it started coming back down. It's not come back down fully yet. Like I've said, leaders are a little bit different. But after we saw the peak, the price has started falling. When we get to the non-leader cards, we are going to see the prices proper job crashing. It's going to be amazing. But we're unfortunately not quite there yet. But you can see here the price is coming down rather nicely. And we see this with a bunch of the other leaders. Smoker jumped up a lot. And this is basically when the pre-release happened. Seriously, like the jump happens on March the 3rd, which is literally the first day of pre-releases. We see a big jump when the pre-release happens, which as I've told you is to be expected. And then it stabilized and started to fall. This is exactly what we expect. These big jumps are happening when the pre-releases happen, i.e. when the hype absolutely explodes because the cards are finally out there in the wild, and then it starts to tail off and it's starting to fall. The leaders take a bit longer to fall than the other cards for the reasons I've outlined, but you can see with the two I've shown you they are starting to fall. Now, the one that is bucking the trend a little bit is Kinemon. And I'm not 100% sure why this is the case, but Kinemon is a little bit weird because this one did fall very quickly. We saw exactly what we would expect. It starts to fall. It went from 150 down to 125, but it's now crept back up to 145. And this is a little bit of an anomaly. Because generally speaking, as we see, the prices may well shoot up after pre-release. That's to be expected. And then the prices start falling. That's to be expected. But to then jump back up again? This one does buck the trend and doesn't really make a huge amount of sense in that regard. And my explanation very simply is, the hype is growing for the leader. People want to be playing the leader, people are getting hyped for this particular leader, and somebody somewhere has started building hype that this is going to be a playable deck. That is essentially where this comes from. Now, in terms of Sanji, we're starting to see a lot more of what we would expect. We saw a big jump up to $190, and it has already fallen down to $140, exactly as we would expect. Anyone want to guess the exact date where that spike happens? It's March the 3rd. March the 3rd, for anyone that's forgotten, is exactly 1 week before the release of the set. It was the first day where pre-releases could happen. And this shouldn't really surprise anyone. Essentially, pre-releases cause the prices to absolutely spike, and then they go down after that. Anyone want to know the date where it started falling again? It was actually March the 9th, the day before release, but, you know, a lot of people end up getting it a day or two early. That's why we see the fall. All of this is to be expected. But what about the most expensive character card? I've told you that because they're one-offs and they're always on the field, people are more comfortable spending a bit more on leaders. They tend to hold their value a little bit more. Although, like I've said, with the exception of Kinemon, which really is bucking the trend, the others are coming down just a bit slower than the characters. But if we look at Edward Newgate, the character, this is exactly what we would be expecting to happen. The alternate art of Edward Newgate, we saw that it started off on March the 2nd. There wasn't really much of a pre-order on TCG Player. 165, it's already dropped to 121. We have already seen somewhere in the region of a $40 dip. It's basically gone down about a quarter. Not exactly, but near enough, 25%, near enough a quarter since it released. And actually, the latest solds are a little bit lower than that again. We expected this to absolutely crash, and this is exactly what's happening. And the thing with character cards is that because you kind of need 4 of them, or up to 4 depending on the deck and all of that, obviously 4 is not a hard and fast rule, and because that then puts a lot more pressure on you financially, people are just not willing to prop up these prices. And we're going to see this with One Piece moving forward. The leaders are going to hold their value better than character cards, although like I've said, with the one exception, they're now falling. But in terms of the character cards, we are going to see this falling time and time again. And if we look at a bunch of other character cards, we're going to see exactly the same kind of thing. If we have a look at the Secret Rare Kazan, the alternate art, we saw a huge dip on release, and it has now started going back up again, and then going back down again a little bit. But you'll notice that on the release of the set, we saw that Kazan dipped down pretty dramatically, which is exactly what we would expect. Some cards are going to dip back up again, and for characters, it's going to be kind of random. Kazan is not as good a card as Edward Newgate, but for some reason, Kazan jumped up a tiny bit, Edward Newgate didn't. For the other Kazan, the super rare, what we see is exactly what we are expecting. As soon as the set actually released, we saw a pretty pronounced drop, and it went from $70 down to $65, which admittedly is, quite a small percentage, but you'll notice if you look at the graph, it's exactly what we would expect. This is, the set's out now. Yeah, let's not spend so much money on it. The alternate art of Uta, the secret rare, we see exactly the same kind of thing. Starts off at $190. within a few days it's down to 65. That is a third of its value. People were paying $180, and to be fair, this one's taken a bit of time to catch up. The last few solds are all like 50 and 55. This is not anywhere near that, but there were people paying $180 on the pre-release for this. And it has dropped down very dramatically. We could look at Nami, the alternate art. Now, this one makes me a bit sad because this is the one I pulled from my pack. But that started off with $150 and it's dropped down to $60. I told you that these prices were going to come down. And there are exceptions. Like I've said, the Kinemon leader is for some reason going back up again. And the Secret Rare Kazan alternate art is going back up again. Although, again, not all that much, to be fair. And the leaders as a whole are taking longer to fall, although, like I've shown you, they are falling. But the character cards especially are absolutely crashing. Nami went from $150 to $60. We saw that Uta went from $180 down to $60. And I honestly could keep going with this for pretty much as long as you want. The alternate art of Borsellino jumped up and then has fallen and is now considerably lower than it was. Again, you'll see not every single card follows the exact same pattern. What we do see is that with a couple of very rare exceptions, they are all falling down. They are all dropping, and Borsellino, you'll notice, has taken a big drop and is still going down. For what it's worth, the market price is $60, but the last few solds, there are a couple of 60s, but there are also a couple that are a little bit lower. The alternate art of Portgas D-Ace, what do we see? A drop from $100 to $60 very, very, very quickly indeed. For a lot of the character cards, the prices are actually full-on crashing. And although the leaders are taking a little bit longer, although as I've shown you, they do tend to be going down, you'll notice that the prices as a whole are just crashing very, very nicely indeed. And to be fair, there are some leaders we didn't look at. Emporio Ivankov, which is actually one of the best leaders in the set. That dropped from 170 to 120 very, very quickly. Again, it's a very good leader, but that one follows the trend we're generally looking for. It dropped very, very sharply, very, very quickly. We could look at some of the other ones coming out here. So how about Zephyr? What happened to Zephyr? Exactly the same thing. Started off at $115, now down to $75. That is a dramatic drop. And this is my point here. You will, in most sets, you will be able to find a couple of cards that buck the trend. There are usually one or two cards that buck the trend. And as I've told you, it is fair to point out that the leaders, at least the really good sought after leaders, they do tend to hang on that little bit longer. But I think it's pretty clear the prices for Paramount War, since the set came out, have fallen, and in most cases, they have fallen pretty gosh darn dramatically. Anyone that bought the alternate art of Uta, the alternate art of Nami, the alternate art of the Ivankov leader, cards like that, if you bought those cards on the pre-release, and you'll notice I made a video literally saying stop buying these cards, you ended up paying a lot more. In the case of Uta, $120 more. In the case of Nami, $90 more than you needed to actually spend, because it turns out those cards were massively overpriced. And if you really want, you can go, well, or see, the alternate art of Edward Newgate has only just started coming down. Fair point, but it has started coming down. You could talk about Kinemon as an exception and the fact that that has started popping back up again. I don't expect that one to hold, I'll be honest with you. The two best leaders in the set are Newgate and Ivankov. Kinemon's good, but it's not as good as those two, at least if we go by the Japanese results. But bar a couple of rare exceptions, what has happened is that since the pre-release, the prices of Paramount War singles have, in a shocking twist of fate, started going down. And to all the people that responded to my previous video going, this dude clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, I taught business for over a decade. I quit teaching business to cover card games for a living. There will be sometimes I'm wrong. And I admitted right at the start of the video, Romance War, the lack of the pre-release combined with the unavailability of product did weird things to those prices. They did not fall like almost every other set does on release. That was an exception, and I've admitted that. But Paramount War, I told you what was going to happen, and I now have to come back a few days later to go, hey, yeah, you know what I said was going to happen? That's happening. But do remember, and this is a very important note on which to finish, this is not going to last forever. Paramount War is selling out. And it will be restocked, we know this, but it is still selling out. And there is going to come a point where the influx of product slows down, because there isn't all of the release day product. And as the influx of product slows down, these prices probably will start creeping up again. But for now, I think I've shown pretty conclusively that yes, the Paramount War prices are falling very nicely indeed. Yay! But now, ladies and gentlemen, it's over to you guys. Tell me which of these cards you pulled. Tell me which of these cards you're after. Tell me anything you want to tell me in the comment section. Go nuts! Be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at the Wasi. That's where we talk about One Piece and a bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, all that fun stuff. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wasi Plays.